a thing called the while loop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, within this main function, I'm going to get rid of all those things there, and I'm going to say we're going to set up a variable. We'll call it count or counter equals 1. And what we're going to do then is we're going to say we're going to have what's called a while loop. So a while loop is a thing that goes around in a loop, like what it suggests. While counter, or we're going to say while true. Actually, we're going to just do that, while true. And the word true, actually, rather than do that, what we're going to do, we're going to say while do loop around. We're going to call that a variable. That's a variable. And what we're going to do, we're going to assign a value to that variable. So when we do loop around, we've got something called, as well as a number and a string, we've got something called a boolean. And a boolean is basically a true or a false. So if I assign false to a variable like that, I can assign counter equals 1, that's a number. I can assign name equals Arion, that's a string. I can say loop around, and that can be false. That's what's called a boolean. And a boolean, spelled B-O-O, like this, boolean. Show you, boolean. Like that. That means true or false, basically. That's going to be either on or off, like a light switch, true or false, the two values. So this loop around at the moment, we're going to set it to true, all right? And we're going to say, well, in this loop, we're going to print the value of a counter, right? So we're going to say counter here, and we're going to actually put it in a string so we can actually see what thing we're talking about. And what we're going to do is we're going to add the value to this counter in this loop until a particular condition is met. So we're going to do plus str, and we're going to put that counter in there, in that str. So there's our counter. And then what we're going to do is this counter starts at 0, right? So you can imagine a counter might be going around in a loop, and this is our counter. So we're going to keep adding 1 to this counter. So let's say, for instance, you've got a little man and he wants to run across the screen, and we want to get him to do something 10 times, right? So we're going to set this counter to 0, and then we're going to say this loop around is equal to true, and we're going to print that value of that counter out. So we know that counter is going to start at 0. So when this comes across and this statement gets executed here, then we'd expect that to print 0 out. Then what we're going to do is we're going to say counter equals counter plus 1. So we know that from before that every time we get a variable and we do a calculation on it like this, like adding 1 for instance, that Python will work that value out and then it'll put it into that variable there. So it will take this value, whatever's counters at the moment, which is 0, it'll add 1 to it, so that becomes equal to 1, this value does, and then it'll put it into there. So counter now becomes equal to, first time in this loop, it'll be equal to 1. Then what we're going to do is we're going to carry on doing that. Now if we did that forever and ever and we printed this counter up, I can run that and I can actually show you what it will do. Oops. So we've got an indentation error, and that's because we haven't indented this bit of code. So don't forget that when we're actually doing this, we need to indent everything underneath this if. So in this case, no functions are being called because we've got them up there, but we're not calling any from within this main. So this is a block of code that we're just calling within the main method, or the main within main, within this block of code anyway, basically. So what it's going to do is it's going to say loop around equals true. So while this is true, so this is in the same way that we had the if statement, this while statement is saying, right, while this condition is true, do this bit of code. And because it's always true, this will go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. It'll go on for infinity. If I run this program now, it will literally go on forever until my computer blows up or runs out of power or whatever, until the end of the world. It will literally run on. Well, that's called an infinite loop. So if I run this, you'll see that counter is going up and up and up and up and up, and it's counting. It's going as fast as it possibly can, as fast as this computer can actually cope with it. So it's gone up to, what's that, millions. It's in the millions already. Now I can't stop this at the moment. There's nothing in here that will stop that going. The only way I can stop it is by stopping the program itself, and that's that red button there. So that stopped the program, and we got up to, you can see there's 3,878,000 that counted up to within those few seconds, right? So now what I want to do is I want to basically, instead of doing that count plus 1 there, counter equals counter plus 1, I want to stop it when that counter gets to 10. So all I need to do there is, in the same way we use that if statement, if counter equals and then 10, right? And what I want to do is I want to set that loop around variable, that Boolean variable that we set. I want to say loop around, I want to set that equal to false, right? So what's going to happen now is it's going to go around this loop, and then, but every time it comes around this loop, it's going to hit this, and it's going to say, right, is the counter currently equal 10? Well, it'll keep going, and eventually, within a few seconds, well, very quickly, it'll get to 10, because it's just adding 1 every time. And as soon as it does, we want to execute this bit of code. So this condition will be true because it reaches 10. This will then get executed, and this loop around will get set to false. Well, while we're going around this loop, this line is always getting executed, this line here. So to start with, this is set to true, and then when the value of counter is equal to 1, it's still true. The value of counter equals 2, it's still true, and the value of counter equals 3, it's still true. But as soon as it gets to 10, we've got this thing here that's actually saying, right, as soon as it gets to 10, I want to set this loop around to false. So when this line gets executed, when counter breaches 10, it'll stop and it'll drop out of this loop, and it'll come out here, and we want to print, when it comes out of that loop, finished. Finished. Spell it. Right, so we're going to run that again. Right, so you can see now, it started at 0, counter, it's gone round this loop, and it's keeping going round until, and each time it's going round, it's checking this condition to see whether this is true. And it's not true because the counter has not reached 10, but as soon as that reaches 10, in other words, once we hit 8, and we've added 1 to it, sorry, once we've hit 9, and we've hit 1 to it, because this print statement's up here, we only see the value 9. If I put this print statement underneath, which is probably where it should be, then what you'll do, you'll see the value 10 actually come out as well. It's where you put the print statement, because what's happening is, I'll just run that and then you'll see what I mean. Oops, doesn't like the indentation. That's because this isn't lined up. So it's just always 4 spaces in, or it just needs to be the right number of spaces. And that's because Python, the way it works is basically it knows that this bit of code needs to be run as part of this, and this bit of code here needs to be run as part of this test. So these are both conditional statements, they're called. The while loop and the if loop, both conditional statements, which basically evaluates a true or a false. So that will work out, come to a true or a false. That'll work out as a true or a false, which is why they're called conditional. and we run those. So now we can see the counter. So it started at, we've seen it starting at 1 and going through to 10. So that's a way of looping around. So you can imagine that we've got a character going across the screen, like from here to here. And within Pygame, for instance, I can print a character, a particular X and Y coordinate on the screen. And so when I increment the X value, you'll see him going from this position to this position. He might move 10 steps. And that's the way of doing it, basically. That's what you're doing. By doing that, you're actually updating the character position, for instance. And what we could do is we could actually use this counter to call a function called, every time we increment it here, we could say update character position, and then we pass in that value of that counter, right? And then that way that would get called. So I might have within here, I might have a function called update character position, taking in a counter value or X coordinate or something, maybe call it on the screen. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call that, and we might use Python to a Pygame command, pygame.update, and then something where we pass in the next coordinate in there, and that again is another function in itself. But the difference is that Pygame itself, of course, is a library, but again we might use a Python. We'll basically use a Python command to update that X coordinate. So that's an example where you would like tie the two together, the game part and the Python part, which are both Python, but it's a way of calling functions. So that's a while loop. So in the same way we've done a while loop, we've got other ways of looping around. We can say within Python, there's a way of actually going for I in range 10, and this will basically go and print we can print the value of I, and this is again is a way of actually going around in the loop a lot easier. So if I comment this stuff out here and we just run this one, and we just run that by itself, oops. Then you can see we go, we can go 1 to 10 like that. We'll just do that for now. You get the idea. Basically, you can print out. It's a simple loop. So we're saying for I in the range 0 to 10. So it'll just go and print out values between that up to that from 0 to just before you get to that range value. So that's the while loop, the for loop, if statements. We talked about variables as well, and yeah, and how you might use that within the game as well. So yeah.